Hello, class. So, I am a happy teacher. I am very pleased with everything that you guys said and posted from this lovely little book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This was exactly what I was looking for. I know a couple of you really struggled with the video aspects, and for that I'm really truly sorry. As I've said before, PowerPoint is a really interesting new option that I've discovered. You can, for your Hamilton post, which is going to be in April, you can type up some ideas on the PowerPoint slide, and then when you're ready to go, you click on, oh gosh, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's slideshow, and then you record your face in the bottom right corner while you're going through the PowerPoint. It saves the file, like this saves the video to the PowerPoint file, and it's only a little bit bigger than what a PowerPoint file would be saved at. So that's always an option if you want to do that for Hamilton. If you just want to do the YouTube version, that's fine too. Only one of you appeared to have done Panopto. That's the program that comes with Canvas. And so it's a subscription that Yavapai College has. I've made that link available to you on the left sidebar, so you can always choose that as well. Whatever is easiest for you is what I'm the happiest with. So I'm flexible. As long as I can see your face and as long as I can hear what you have to say, then I am a happy camper. This was perfect. I loved that I got to see all of your lovely faces, or like in Joe's case, we got to see his kitchen as well, which I thought was pretty great. I loved that that it didn't feel stilted at all. And that is the whole ambition behind wanting you to talk for 10 minutes. It's harder for you to fake having not read it in 10 minutes, which is kind of like the pedagogical reason for my wanting to do that. But on top of that, you know, there's that tactic that they say in interviewing. You know, when you interview a person, you ask a question and they give you an answer. And then the interviewer says, or something affirming, and then they pause. And they wait out the other person, and then the interviewee always adds more. So that was what I was trying to get in this 10-minute required post, was not only your response to my questions, and if you didn't exactly answer my questions, that's fine, that's not the point. The point was I wanted to see what you would come up with, and then, you know, what would you say to fill in that space? And that's always the most interesting part. And none of you disappointed me. I think that we really got there. So I'm very excited by what you had to say. I have some notes, so let me read through them. Several of you commented on the fact that this was a child's ability to deny or address reality, especially in the face of trauma. I had one very oddly phrased question. I was trying to phrase it in a way that would lead you to this conclusion without saying, do you think this is that his magical realism is a response to trauma, right? Because then it would be yes or no question and response. But I think most of you got that. So, and I think as Diane said, it doesn't really matter if what he saw is what he truly saw or not. What matters is that was what helped him cope. And so I think that was an important aspect to this particular narrative. Noelle had something very interesting to say about the cats. And most of you got the fact that the cats are very important for this story. A lot of you recognize that they're like protectors or they're gatekeepers of some kind. I think it's Egyptian mythology, cats have a kind of very godlike presence. They are like the keepers of the underworld, which is kind of an interesting concept. I don't know if Gaiman was going for that or not, but it is an interesting concept. I'm thinking now of the scene of The Mummy with Rachel Weisz, where Brendan Fraser walks in with the cat and goes, boo, and the mummy goes, ah! Yeah, sorry, that was just a funny moment in my head. Killian had something very interesting to say. She said that she was very entertained by the story, and that it made her laugh and cry, and that she was joyful and she was sad, and all of these emotions were important to her because writers are so familiar with story that it's sometimes hard for us to connect. And that really touched me. I think there is something really interesting there, because we as writers should be reading a lot. We should be reading what we want to write, and we should be reading copious amounts of it. I mean, I think at this point, lately I've been reading 2 books a week. And that doesn't mean that I read them within a week. I mean, sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 weeks for me to read them, but I try to finish at least one over a weekend. And it'll usually be like 1 poetry book and 1 other book. But because we're devouring and absorbing literature so much, that I think Killian has a great point. And I'm sure you all feel this way as students, right? You're required to devour literature and process it and synthesize it and analyze it, and all of the Bloom's taxonomy verbs for how to process literature at such a fast rate that it's really hard for you to step back and say, okay, now what touched me? And so I like that this one did touch many of you. Josh suggested that this was a young adult novel, which I thought was an interesting opportunity to comment to that, because readerships for novels are determined by the age of the narrator. So, like for example, Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series is intended for an age group called the young readers, and the young readers are typically an age group between like 9 and 13. And that age group was determined for Harry Potter because Harry Potter was that age during the narrative of the novels. What's another example? John Green's books often feature characters who are 16, 17, 18 years old, which is why they're classified as teen or YA, young adult literature. I'm reading a book right now. I think I've probably mentioned it too many times at this point. It's called The Double Bind by Chris Bahalian. And the protagonist in that book is a 33-year-old female. And I relate to it because I'll be turning 33 next month. So for me, that is an appropriate age group, or at least it's a comfortable age group for me to read in. So that would be that novel is determined as adult fiction because an adult is the protagonist and narrator. Now, what's interesting about this is that the protagonist, or hero, arguably, we'll get to that point in just a second, our unnamed protagonist is 7 for the majority of the story and remembers it as a 7-year-old. However, he is 47 as he is looking back, or 40-ish. I think we can agree that he's 47, but he's in his 40s at the very least. So, either he can be classified as an adult for adult fiction or as a young reader. It's kind of an interesting concept. I think it's mostly classified under sci-fi fantasy, an adult sci-fi fantasy at that. But I do think Josh had an interesting point, so I'll let you kind of mull that over and come to a conclusion. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer in creative writing a lot of the time. I can guide you toward the right answer, but I'm not like any expert who can empirically declare anything. So, that's not really my role. My role is to help you on the path for self-discovery, not really to represent the publishing world. Geez, that sounds like a huge undertaking. Let me look at my notes here. Okay, the whole notion of who the hero or the protagonist is an interesting one, because Larry said in his video that he believed that Letty was the protagonist, and he believed that Letty was the protagonist based on the PowerPoint presentation I had from 2 weeks ago. That was the one about plot, and that one talked about the hero's journey and the protagonist and the antagonist and what the driving question is. So Larry believed that Letty was the protagonist because she was the one making the choices in the story. He believed that she was moving the story along and that she was the one fighting all the battles. I think there is something to be said there. However, I also agree with what Joe had to say when Joe said that he did not think that Letty was the protagonist because she would have a very different story to tell. So, I think that's an interesting point because Larry is arguing that our hero, our unnamed hero, is a first-person peripheral narrator like Nick Carraway in Gatsby. Whereas Joe is saying that Letty is thousands of years old. We don't know exactly how old she is, and therefore she would have a different motivation for telling that story. Very, very interesting. Personally, I think that our unnamed hero is the protagonist because he's the one with the driving question. And he is the one who has the most to gain or the most to lose from the scenario. So, that's what I think. But again, I can't empirically say, can I? And then one last thing on my list here. Both Joe and Toria said that they believed that all three of the hemstocks were the same. That all of them were a shade of Letty at different points in her existence, which I think is a very fascinating idea. And it even could reference something. Now I'm reading, of many books I'm reading, one of them is The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, and he's arguing that that mythology and true like fairy tale based or fable based storytelling is not so much about the story as it is about psychology and what about the story teaches us. And interestingly, what if Letty, her mom, and Grandma were all three parts of one being, which is in its own way a trinity, which would be religious in nature, and this of course would be more of like a maybe Celtic, Druidic, pagan female trinity, but still religious in nature. Very, very, and that would also, this is a great idea, also would explain why they've been around for thousands of years and saw the creation of the universe. And would also explain why they're in charge of making sure that they clean up this mess that is Ursula Monkton and the harbingers, the birds that eat up the mess. Pretty interesting idea. I just love how when like you can read a book, you can appreciate it, and you can discuss it, and then you read it with a bunch of writers, and it changes, it transforms, it becomes this thing that you already saw a little bit of, but now you see it in its bigger entirety, and you still don't quite understand it, but you misunderstand it a little less, if that makes sense. So, all of you liked it, which I thought was really good, because Lorraine Herring warned me once that, never pick a book for a class that you absolutely love, because, inevitably someone in the class will hate it, will tear it to shreds, and then your soul will die. So I'm glad that even for those of you who weren't like in love with the story, you still appreciated it for what it was. So thank you for that. Thank you for being kind. I'm just kidding, I'm being dramatic. Couple things I wanted to talk about with this book. First of all, I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a picture, and this actually looks up a little bit better on the screen than it does in real life, which I think is odd. But this little guy right here is actually Neil Gaiman. So in one of the interviews, and I think this was the YouTube one that I added on Tuesday, he said that his sister, I think somebody in his family, found this picture after he